Welcome to
What?
episode 8 of season 2. Today we welcome Sharon, a proud Persian Jew, to talk about Persian Jewish pride from Babylonian times to post-Iranian revolution. So it was only a past few years that I was introduced to and befriended Persian Jews. And what struck me was the very close bond that the community has, at least the one in Great Neck, New York, which is the one I'm familiar with, and the very strong traditions that Persian Jews have overall. And so, Sharon, I would love to find out throughout our conversation if your community prefers to be called Persian Jews or Iranian Jews. And I know that many Muslims from Iran who now live in America, they prefer to be called Iranians. But yet I hear many Jews say Persians. So that will be very interesting to dive into as we get going into the conversation. So I would like to first start off with our first topic, which is what makes Persian Jews unique in terms of a Jewish subculture? And so I know that Jews usually describe themselves overall as one of three categories. We have Mizrahi, Sephardi, or Ashkenaz. And although we're all Judeans, of course, are Persian Jews a separate category, would you say? Or do you consider yourself part of the Mizrahi Jewish community, even though Iran is not Arab?
So, that's such an interesting question because even today, friends and family, we have like different views on what we consider ourselves.
Mhm.
Technically, I suppose we would be considered Mizrahi. But I just feel Iranian Jews are different, or Middle Eastern Jews, like Iraqi Jews, Persian Jews. There is a difference. I do know people that still call themselves Sephardic, even though they're Iranian. But I feel we're Mizrahi. That makes more sense to me. I always thought Sephardi was more of a Spanish descent. So, and I'm not Ashkenazi, I know that. So definitely Mizrahi. But I tell you, I made the mistake way when I was younger, thinking I was Sephardic. I didn't even know there was a Mizrahi when I was younger. So, but when I did find out, I said, this makes more sense. And looking back in history, there was there was a mix of the Mizrahi and the Sephardim when we were being exiled from place to place and displaced in different areas. So at that point, there really wasn't a definition. But now we know, and I do think Middle Eastern Jews are more Mizrahi. There is a difference. There is a notable difference, yes.
And you're so right, because actually I just had on Adela Kohab last week, and she's a Syrian Jew. And so you would think Syrian Jews are all Mizrahi, but then she explained that within her own family, there's the Sephardic side, and then there's the Mizrahi side, but they're all Syrians. Just matter of when they came into Syria. Did they come, after the first exile, which was stemming from the destruction of the first temple, or did they come after the Inquisition, hundreds and hundreds of years later?
Exactly.
And it's interesting you say that too, because I know in Israel today, and I just found this out very recently, I thought too, it was like Mizrahi and Sephardic and Ashkenaz, but now the Mizrahi and Sephardic communities have merged into one basically in Israel, and now they all call themselves just Sephardic. So that's also confusing in a way.
It's very, we're complicated. We're a complicated tribe.
What's
Nothing is easy with us.
What's that saying? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I think that definitely embodies that thinking. And so what stands out most for you as a Persian Jew in terms of your culture? Like, so if you could explain the Persian culture to an audience that is not that familiar with it, including myself in a way, even though I have some Persian friends, but it's not that like when we get together, they talk in depth about their culture. It's just things that I pick up, right? Like from observation. So anything you'd like to share?
Do you want to know about the food? Do you want to know about the celebrations?
Yeah.
Do you want to know about
any
where to begin?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can go down the list, so we can talk about any specific traditions, food. Is Persian Jewish prayer any different from the other communities? So let's break it down. There's many more topics, but let's break down those 3.
Okay, so the prayers, when I go to a Sephardic or Ashkenazi home for high holidays, it's different. It's the prayers, it's not, maybe theirs is more traditional, whereas Persian Jews, we like to spice it up and kind of throw our own thing into the mix. And because there's so many different geographical locations we all came from, and there's generational differences, and northern Iran, southern Iran, at some point there's a mix. I can't say I've been to like one family where, it's been consistently the same. There's always a little something that's different. Even our foods are different when it comes to high holidays. So like, we don't do gefilte fish. We don't understand what that means. Why would you do that?
Very, very lucky as an Ashkenaz Jew who hates gefilte fish. Oh my gosh, you guys
why would you torture yourself? Like, didn't we already do all this?
So for example, like what would be a couple of traditional foods for the high holidays that you would see in a Persian Jewish home?
Okay, so this is the difference between Persian Jews and I feel every other Jew is we don't have a traditional food, I would say, for the high holidays. I know usually you have brisket or certain roast chicken, but sometimes it's just the traditional Persian dishes that we do, regardless of if it's a high holiday, a regular dinner, or whatever. So yeah, maybe for Rosh Hashanah or something, we'll do, someone does a brisket, but usually it's not like that. It's not like that. It's just Persian food. Yeah, we don't have that, I have to say.
So would I forgive my mispronunciation, but is tahdig part of?
Oh, right? I'm so happy you brought that up. Tahdig is just tahdig, and it should be served all the time. So.
The best, honestly, like the best dish ever invented.
Ever. So you have various versions of tahdig, which means crispy rice. And what you do is you put oil on the bottom. There's a certain way you prepare the rice to make it like very crispy. And there's variations. There's different flavors. There's spaghetti tahdig, which is a version that we just, I guess, came here and Americanized. It Americanized us, I guess. There's potato tahdig. There's even matzah tahdig. Anything crispy at the bottom. Some people do like salmon skin tahdig. I'm not a fan, but it's a thing. So there's a lot of rices and stews basically in our food. And of course there's kebab and,
Wow. And then in terms of, this is just off the cuff that I just thought about. So the Jews of Persia, right? Like they ended up, or your community ended up in the Persian Empire as a result of the Babylonian exile.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, the Jews of Babylonia at that time, right, truly developed or helped shape Judaism as even we know it today. And so just thinking like in terms of the prayer, right? So like I know that there's Ashkenaz prayer, there's Ashkenaz synagogues and there's Sephardic synagogues.
Right.
And so in a way, I'm just thinking, is your community on the way maybe like it prays, however you could explain it that way, in a way, would not that have been the most traditional way, right? Because the Persian Jews shaped the Talmud in a way.
Again, like especially in the communities that are here in the diaspora, I feel just having to flee a homeland and assimilate, all these traditions kind of changed and melded and assimilated. So the prayer thing, it's different in the Persian families, I have to say, unless they're Orthodox, which is also kind of rare within the Iranian community, or their kids went to Hebrew school or the parents also went to Hebrew school. There isn't that. I don't know how to explain. It's different. Like you'll say the Shabbat prayers, and that's pretty much the same across the board. But temples are different. There's different ways they celebrate high holidays, and so it's kind of a mishmash. And like I'll go to my Sephardic temple, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I'll go to another temple with a Mizrahi rabbi. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And so there's just, and you never know what's going to happen. So. I don't know. It's definitely, I guess it's what would happen to an ethnicity of people or tribe that had to leave and assimilate. I don't know if you know this, but I was born in Israel. So
Nice. Okay.
I was fluent in Hebrew. I knew how to read and write, and we did the prayers every night. When we moved to America, we still did that. And I wanted to assimilate so badly that I'm like, no, I don't want to speak Hebrew anymore. Da, 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 da. And, but that we kept. And that was, I think, because I grew up there for a few years, and that was part of who I was. But the rest of my family, my mom and my dad's side, just did traditional Shabbat prayers, but nothing like you would see in more, I guess, conservative Orthodox Jewish families.
Right. I understand. And then in terms of food, because a lot of people love the topic of, food from different communities. So did the Persian Jews adopt the food that the Muslims were eating, within Iran, or are there some dishes that are specific to the Jewish community? That
I don't think so. I think if you were a Jew and you were born and raised in Iran, or you're generational Iran, you had influences from like Morocco and India and everywhere. So the only thing that really changes is maybe the spices that are used. And we'll make the same dishes, and maybe there's a different kind of meat used, depending from what region of Iran people were born in, or, and so it changes. The one thing we do is put saffron on everything. Saffron has to be in it, on it, smothered in, which is amazing, but also super expensive. But no, there's a lot of influence, since we're right there in the heart of like Africa below, and like, the other. So there are a lot of spice variations, I have to say, not in the matter of heat, but different, cumin and coriander and za'atar. They're just, yeah.
And it's interesting. So you said that you were born in Israel. So I was in Israel a year ago, and we did a tour of the Levinsky. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Levinsky market in Tel Aviv. And so there was this one Persian stall, and they were serving faluda, which is Persian ice cream, correct? Or like a version of.
Oh, faluda, yes. Oh,
faluda.
Which would be so great right now.
How do you pronounce it correctly?
Faluda.
Faluda. And so that was oh my gosh, that was the most delicious treat I had.
Oh, rose water is the other ingredient we put in everything. Yes, rose water.
It was so great. So I don't know, like I think I'll need to share a link about some maybe Persian Jewish cookbook, some recipes that are.
There's a lot of stewing involved when you make a meal, and it takes hours. And so you also always see your Persian mom in the kitchen for like 8 hours. And a lot of the bases of the stews, just like sidetracking here, you have to put onions and like brown them forever, and then put in the meat and brown that forever. And then it's a build on layers upon layers upon layers and hours of stewing. So
Perfect. And then, so, like food, but then, we're talking about prayers, but let's also get to the language portion. So there's Ladino, there's Arabic Judeo, there's Yiddish, there's an amalgam of other languages that Jews have spoken that melded their diaspora, new identity also with some aspects of Hebrew. So I'm just curious, did Jews in Persia, did they speak a distinct dialect?
As far as I know, it was just Farsi. There was no other dialect like the way you guys have Yiddish. Some people spoke, I suppose, Aramaic as a different language, but nothing as a dialect. I mean, there are different, what's the word? Oh my God, I can't think of the word. Oh my God, when someone's like, if you're French, if you're French, an accent. There are different accents depending on what part of Iran you're from, like Esfahan, Hamadan, like these different parts have slight accents, and you can tell when they're speaking, but there's no dialect difference. Like it wasn't like people from Afghanistan or something that speak a different, like I think they speak Pashtun or something, and it sounds like Farsi, and I can understand it, but the accent is so different that unless you know like Farsi, you're not really going to understand it. But it was really just regular old Persian. Yeah.
So there was no, let's say, Judeo-Farsi, for example.
Nothing I've heard of in family, friends, grandparents. No.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe because Jews have been in Persia.
I'm going to do some research. Yeah, I haven't heard anything like that, but that would be interesting to find.
And I've never heard of that either, when I was doing some background research or
Yeah.
anything like that. So I wanted to ask you. So, maybe again, like that goes hand in hand with how maybe integrated Jews were into Persian society. So I wanted to ask you rather directly, how integrated were Jews in Persian culture overall?
Happening. Uh, okay. Well, that's great.
I see you. I see you.
I think the power went out.
Oh no, no, you're back. You're back.
Everyone has their air conditioning on. Power went out. That's okay. All right. But can you? Oh no.
I
Okay.
see you. I see you.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that, California.
So yes, so how integrated were Jews in Persian culture overall, would you say?
In Iran,
In Iran. Mhm.
very much so. I mean, my mom's best friends, I have to say, even though we were a small minority, we were in universities as professors. We worked as heads of hospitals. We were pretty integrated. I mean, there really wasn't a difference. It depended on, I guess it depends on where you lived. There were some parts of Iran that were still, bigoted against Jews. I know my dad growing up had that experience, whereas my mom didn't. And they grew up in kind of two different parts of Iran. So, whereas my mom's best friends were like the daughters of heads of state and, highly educated, my dad's area was different and they just looked down upon Jews. It's very interesting, like the different subsects and the different areas in Iran.
And was
yeah.
Was it geography specific, like, this region versus that region, or was it?
It wasn't a versus region. I think it's just what Tehran, like Tehran in Iran was a lot more developed and a lot more progressive and, more industrious. And there were other parts, the surrounding areas that were not maybe,
So it was city versus rural areas.
Exactly.
Okay.
So even though my dad wound up excelling like above and beyond, he just had a different experience growing up as a child. Whereas my mom had the opposite.
It's like in places in America also, right? Like we have cities that, obviously have more of a melding culture. And then you have cities that, like, not that they're racist, they just are not exposed, or they don't have,
exactly
of a population that they just don't know how to react. And so you mentioned your father and your mother, and they had different experiences. So could you tell me your own family story, just like from both sides, like how far back do you know the history?
Okay.
Anything you can share would be
okay. Okay. So I was born in Israel, but my parents are from Iran. And the reason we wound up there is because my dad was working for the Israeli military, which I guess now I can say it's been so many years, it's not a secret. But he had a job, he was contracted there. And when we went to Israel, of course, they helped like set you up and take care of you a little bit financially. And after that, we went back to Iran. And that was right around, I want to say 78, 79. And the revolution, the rumblings were happening and we had to leave. So, and this is a story I tell everyone because I don't know, I just find it so ironic and so incredible, is that we were on one of the last El Al flights out of Iran to Israel, which ran on Shabbat, which is a no-no with El Al. And, leaving, for my parents especially, leaving a country that they were flourishing in, or they were just about to flourish in, and having to leave because they would have come, they came after people like during that time to arrest you just because, you were Jewish mostly, or you worked for a certain government or something, and for a long time, my dad wouldn't talk about, anything because he was still so traumatized by it. Again, my mom had a different experience. Her friends were all, daughters of heads of state. And like, it's two different perceptions for them, but they did see the writing on the wall. We did leave. We came back to Israel for another year. And then we came here. And I felt like I had to leave two homes as a young child in a very short time. And it was very difficult because at that time we had the hostage situation going on. And there was a lot of animosity towards Middle Eastern people, Jews. I'm not even sure people knew the difference between that. To this day, I don't think people know that it's not just a religion. Judaism, it's a people. And having to explain that always makes me like, okay, I need a drink. I can't, this is not going to happen.
And in actuality, some people might find this controversial, but it's the truth. Judaism is not even a religion, right? Because religion, it's there's only three religions, right? There's Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. And so the purpose of a religion is to seek seek converts across borders and spread ideas across borders. So like Jews are more akin to Hindus and Druze, where we're a people that has a very unique faith, obviously, and that's important to obviously a lot of Jewish people, and we have unique customs.
Right.
So that's something that I don't know where along the lines, well, actually it was anti-Semitic Christians in Europe that first labeled Jews a religion. And so it's like spiraling from there. And then I think in more modern times, the rabbis wanted to be part of the world stage in terms of religion. So that the great three religions instead of, the base, ethnicity that has a faith.
Yes.
Copied all over. So we can have a whole podcast.
That has to be, exactly. Because to this day, I can't explain. They're like, but how are you Iranian and Jewish? I don't know how to explain it. So I could kind of, it's still very hard to explain. So,
and what do you know about, if anything, like about your grandparents, great grandparents? Like, have you heard stories of what life was for them? But obviously way before the revolution came.
There's a lot of stories that a lot of Jews had to change their names, one to assimilate within the Muslim culture, even before the revolution. And that's why a lot of people have these different names with different endings, because they usually use the last part of the city they were from and put it together with part of the first name of their great grandfather. There's a lot of that going on. So still to this day, my own last name, our own family argues about where it originated from, because our great grandfather had to hide that he was Jewish. So that's a story we're never going to figure out. We just decided on a name, and that's it. So it came from somewhere. And my mom's parents, again, I think it was just the two different locations they grew up in. Just a completely different life experience and perception. And there's still today, there's still parts of Iran that are very hostile towards Jews, although you're not going to hear about it, just like there's everywhere in the world that people that are hostile towards Jews. But my family, I feel they lost a huge part of themselves having to leave, obviously, bringing all that culture and heritage to another country. And then you have young children that are trying to just fit in. It's a very difficult transition. And a lot of people pay the price for it, growing up in that particular time frame, because you want to be like everyone else, but you want to keep your culture, and your parents are freaking out because they don't want you to change. And in Iran, it's not like parents were strict. It's just they came to a new country, and all of a sudden it's like, you can't go out with this person, you can't go to that person's house, you have to stay home. It's this new fear of the unknown.
It's a protection, right? Because
it's protection.
I'm first American. So with me, my parents were very strict. My sister's 5 years younger. With her, they were a lot more at ease because they understood that, we can, protect our girls without, letting them go on dates and but you're right. It's that constant push and pull.
Yeah, it was a lot of push and pull, and I was quite the rebel. And I think there were a lot of girls, especially because here's another part of Iranian Jews that maybe you didn't know about, is that because we moved here, a lot of parents were strict. So dating was very difficult, very, very difficult, and almost just ridiculous. But again, that fear of the unknown. So I feel like my generation had to pave the way and pay the way for the next generations to be able to go out much easier. And, parents aren't scared now, but it was very, very hard transition.
And I hope that the younger generations are thankful for what
I don't know. Some are, yeah.
I would hope. I would hope. And
Yeah.
so I know that, obviously you mentioned what your family went through after the revolution and, what, how they were, involved, like you said, your father involved militarily. So what was and I know maybe not all
Mhm.
Jews are the same, like we can't paint everyone in the same bucket, but what would you say overall was the Jewish relationship with the Shah?
The Shah was a very diplomatic man, I have to say. And all the Jews I know, my families, everyone we still speak to would have preferred him any day, obviously, to what we currently have. And he was a very diplomatic man. And even though there were some controversies around him in the beginning or his predecessors, he wanted people, I don't want to compare him to Cyrus the Great or anything. I just want to say he thought people should also practice freely their religion and be who they are. And he wanted everyone, if you're a Jew, you're going to practice your Judaism. If you're Muslim, you're going to practice that. If you're still Sartorshti, Baha'i, whatever it is, Christian, and, live and let live. So I think there was a great relationship. And I feel in some ways, Jews appreciated him more during that time. Yeah, and there's a whole controversy about that too. Like, yeah, we could get to that. I want you to ask. I don't want
And
you to
and
ask.
so you said that, he was pretty tolerant, right?
Mhm.
Overall.
Yes.
Did he not like surround himself with Jews, but did he have Jews in his government? Like how involved were Jews with the Shah?
There were, I mean, my dad met the Shah. So
Wow.
yeah, there are a lot of, not just my dad, a lot of my friends, parents who were in high places in government or, were engineers, had the honor to work with him, speak with him, meet him. And he was a very welcoming, I don't think he saw people that way.
Mhm.
you know I think he knew it's like if you're someone who contributes to your community and to your country and based on your character, I feel that that's how he judged people and his citizens. And yes, Jews were in quite a few places of power where they were with him and around him. I can't tell you who the advisors were or what positions, but I've seen enough footage and photos to know that a lot of Persian Jews were around him.
And
Yes.
that's interesting. So I know like in Egypt, right, up until the Arab nationalism spread like wildfire in the 1930s, or actually, late 1930s into the 1940s. Before that, Egypt also had many Jewish advisors up to the very.
Hmm.
So I think for many, like, and that was very opposite to what was going on in Europe. So when a lot of
Right.
times Jews hear about that, we're very bewildered, like, oh my gosh, these are Muslims, and how did that happen? But you have to
Right.
understand that it was a very different dynamic
It was
back.
very different. Very different dynamic. Separatism, what I call separatism, and this division wasn't as prominent back then the way it is now. Although that was their plan all along, and that's how the revolution came to fruition. There wasn't that us, you, them, the way it is now. And of course, we didn't have social media, so they couldn't spread like crazy the way it does now. But yeah, I mean,
And also,
Muslims and Jews got along. There was
like, I
no.
think too, like there was such a longevity of Jews in a lot of these Muslim communities that, like, if you look at North Africa, right, it was
Mhm.
the Arabs that came to those countries after Jews did, hundreds of years after Jews, so in some cases, even thousands of years. So Jews were always the fabric. I mean, of course, like in Iran, there were Persians there,
Right.
but also,
Right.
for those who don't know, what we know about Iran right now is not just one nationality. There's an amalgam of nationalities there.
Yes.
You have
Yes.
Balotan, you have Kurds, you can't count how many different
Mhm.
ethnics comprise.
And people don't know, like, it's the temple. Oh my God, I wrote this down. I can't believe there's quite a few historical monuments in Iran, Jewish monuments. And a lot of people don't know that. And I'm so sorry because I'd written it down and I don't know where I put it.
Oh, it's okay. You know what you can do, Sharon, you can send me a link in an
I will
email,
do that.
and I will
Yes,
include
yes,
that.
yes.
Perfect.
Okay, okay.
And so
Wrote it
going,
down.
so going back, because it's such a topic, obviously in the news, and like pertaining
Hmm.
to what we're talking about. So I read reports that during the violence of the revolution, Muslims who supported the regime would tag synagogues saying, "quote, do not harm Jews." and I saw that in some documentary through
Hmm.
American Sephardi Federation. This was before the pandemic. So I wanted to ask you directly, since your family was, very
Mhm.
much involved during that time period, is that true? And if not, what was the situation actually like for Jews in those
Hmm.
early days? I'm not talking about like, once the hostages,
Right, right.
in those very early days of the revolution, like were Muslims refraining from targeting Jews, or was it a free for all?
Hmm. Uh, I can't verify that claim. And I did ask people when you did send me the question, I did ask, and no one really knew anything about it. However, I can say that 5 years before the revolutions, from what I've heard from family, especially my parents, is that there wasn't, depending again what part of Iran you lived in, there wasn't like, oh, we're going to tell on our neighbor. But
Okay.
there were parts where that was happening. There were parts that was happening. And I'm sure there were parts where the Muslims were protecting Jews. But it's such a vast, huge region. That story, I don't know.
So
But
it
were there
wasn't like,
bad people? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So it wasn't like an edict went out, do this or don't do this. It was just depending on where you were.
Yeah, because, because most of all versions that I know are from Tehran, most of them, we all had similar experiences, but I do know, and I've heard stories, and not just from my Jewish friends, my Muslim friends, that they also had to be leery of what to say and do. So it wasn't just a Jewish experience, I feel. I feel like if you were against that regime coming in, you kind of had to keep quiet. You had to know, yes, or leave, which is what a lot of people did. Not just Jews, a lot of Muslims left. A lot
Right,
of Muslims
because
left. Yes.
Los
So
Angeles,
like
Los Angeles, where you live, it's called Little Tehran.
Tehran, yeah,
Right?
Tehran.
And not just because of the
Exactly.
community, but also the Muslims who live there as
Of
well.
course, yes.
And so Israel and Iran, for those who don't know, who are listening in, were very good friends before 1979.
Yes, yes.
How close would you say were the two countries? Like in terms of projects they were working on?
Projects, a lot. Yes, a lot in manufacturing and engineering, absolutely. And I think that's what kept that relationship is what kept everything so stable for such a long time. And of course, after this regime came in, I think part of it was to also, just what's the word when you say you basically mess up the Middle East. I'm sorry, like the word I'm looking for.
Destruct,
What is it?
Destruct.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah.
So that was the idea, and they knew once that relationship was going to be severed, that every other country, surrounding country, would be an easy target as well. But they were close. There was a huge relationship when it came to technology, and like I said, engineering. It's huge between the two nations. Yes.
Is it true that Israel helped Iran build the airport and also parts of their first nuclear plant? I had read that somewhere, but I don't know.
You'd have to ask my dad. He would
Okay.
know, but I could say that could be very true because of the technology. Israel, even right now, we know how far ahead they are with technology and just building and construction. So it's very possible. I'm going to look into that myself because I hadn't heard of. I hadn't heard of that one. I hadn't heard of that one, but it's possible.
I'll link you the articles.
Yes, please do. We're going to be linking a lot of back and forth. Yes.
Absolutely. And it's interesting what you say about Israel, because at the time, and this is just so ironic given all of the geopolitical situations that have transpired since.
Yeah.
At the time, Israel had no friends in its neighborhood, right? At all. Like when I say the neighborhood. And so the only two countries who agreed to be friends with Israel, like quote unquote, and I hate saying this because Israel's been around for thousands of years, but
yes,
in its sovereign form, right? Like the new kid on the block in terms of international recognition was only Turkey and Iran. And now look where those relations are, right? Like obviously, Turkey is under Erdogan, just a complete disaster towards Israel.
Yes.
I don't know. Like it's funny because before Erdogan came to power, I always wanted to go to Turkey, and now that he's there,
right?
I'm going to wait this out a little bit.
Right. Definitely do not go there now.
I have Israeli
Really?
friends who go to Turkey, and I'm like,
Ah,
do you guys think like the government hates you
no.
guys?
My dad actually went to the University of Ankara there too. I
Oh,
forgot about it. He's fluent in Turkish. But yeah, he's like, you can't go visit there now. Like you just not right now.
yeah, but
So
when your father went, he probably had a complete different experience, right? Like
he
it's
had a different experience and he actually went back a few years ago. I can't remember when he went back just to go visit his old university. And it hadn't gotten so horrible yet.
Mhm.
And but yeah, it was a different experience back then. He had a lot of good memories. Yeah, but he does remember going to university. And when they found out he was Jewish, like I'll tell you a story. They all either didn't want to be his roommate all of a sudden, or they were best friends with him, and then they would treat him differently, or they wouldn't invite him to dinner. He even got passed up for a couple of promotions because he was Jewish, even though he was the top engineer. So there was still this underlying little something, that was that little bigotry that was still there. And it's not, I don't feel like people really were born that way. It's something that they get brainwashed into. It's generations of the same message, and then they just believe it. And then when you talk to them, they don't know why they believe it.
Mhm.
They'll say, you're my brother, but I can't because you're Jewish.
Well,
You
it's
know?
like in Saudi Arabia, right? Up until last year, they had textbooks and state media that were
Yes.
Jews are the sons of apes and pigs. And all it took was for Mohammed bin Salman to say, okay, enough of that, like, erase all of those lies.
Mhm.
And I was in Saudi Arabia 6 months ago, and our
Wow.
tour guide, like, he was not high up in the government. He was not even a government official. He was just a regular tour guide and very middle class. For
Mhm.
those who don't know, most Saudis are middle class. When you see those with riches, they're part of the
Yes.
vast royal family. And
Right.
it was not a Jewish tour, like he didn't need to sugarcoat anything. So he mentioned Jerusalem, and he said Jerusalem does not belong to Islam. Jerusalem is for Jews, and he said
Right.
something positive about Israel. So it's interesting what you say, because even though at the time your father went to university in
Mhm.
Turkey, the government was fairly, tolerant towards Jews.
Yes.
But still, you had that, you had those misconceptions, you had those propaganda, emanating
Mhm.
from some society. But then you look at what's going on now in Iran. We'll get into that a little bit, towards the end of our conversation.
Yeah.
You see, and I'm not saying all of the protesters, but I'm
Right.
seeing a lot of videos that these protesters are lauding the US, lauding Israel. They're not stepping on the Israeli flag. They're not,
Right.
on the American flag. There was a soccer match somewhere in Iran a couple months ago, and they were chanting against Palestinians. I say that in quotes,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Palestinians,
Yeah.
and they were chanting pro-Israel. And I was like, first of all, who are these people? What's
I want to know too.
yeah.
But I also want to know.
I
Yeah.
will tag you in that video, because again, like, I don't know their
I've
views.
seen it. I'm still wondering, like, how were they so bold to do that?
Right.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
And also, like, I do want to know their back there. And again, we can get into this a little bit later in the conversation, because you can shed light on this if you know a lot more than I do. But I read that it's a lot of the minority ethnic groups that are a lot more pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, because they themselves have been repressed for so long. So the
Mm.
Baluchis, the Kurds, so many others I can't even pronounce,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Um,
they're not being, shared on the news. And so, like, I think that a lot of people just lump all Persians together.
they do.
Mhm.
They do. In regards to what's happening in Iran now, that's what you're asking, right?
Although let's hold off on that, because I do
Yes.
have
Yes.
questions
Yes. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
that will flow into that. I promise the audience. So before the revolution, in the 1950s, I know that Iran helped some Iraqi Jews escape by giving them temporary paperwork. I also know this firsthand, because one of my friends is Iraqi Jew, and his
Mhm.
mom ended up in Iran for decades before
Mhm.
ultimately leaving for Israel and then America. So, is there anything to add to that time period, those circumstances? And do you know if Iran ever helped other Jews escape from other countries besides Iraq?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know necessarily. Um, But I can tell you that having to have helped other families just escape Iran, it's very likely that there was help in, getting people outside of out of another country that was oppressive. There's an organization I work for now that's 43 years old, and it from America who were helping people leave Iran, get citizenship here, and it's a Jewish organization. So I do believe that definitely that could have happened, because it's part of who we are. It's part of us as a culture and as a people. It could be, it's a blessing and a curse, I feel like, because you wind up helping everyone else and then we're like the last. But I do believe that. I mean, because we know what it's like to be, exiled. And we've had a history. And then if you go back, and most people in that region have a history of being exiled from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I do believe that there was help. And yeah. Definitely, because we had to do it here. We had to help people when we came here to escape.
And do you know personally any Jews in your community that originally were from Iraq?
I know I have two friends that are Iraqi Jews, but it's like the next generation or first gen. It's not first generation. But I don't meet too many, surprisingly. I know there are a lot. Right. But it's for some reason, and maybe in LA, I know of only two, and I've been here most of my life. So that's just odd to me.
Interesting.
And they're Iraqi Iranian Jews. You know what I'm saying?
So maybe because the Iraqi Jews formed their own communities when they arrived in America.
I don't know,
I'll have to ask my friend that who's very.
You do, because I'm telling you, for just we'll go into this too. It's like how we're so social and there's so many parties and whatever. I only know two people that call themselves Iraqi Jews, and they're also Persian. You know what I mean? So, yeah,
that's interesting. Okay,
but I know there are a lot of them. I just have never come as a community. I know they exist. I just maybe they don't stand out in the same way, but yeah.
I will definitely ask my friend a little bit more detail.
Laurie, I feel very not knowledgeable all of a sudden about my own people.
No. Sorry, we're tackling everything. So I do want to talk about something that I hope is not too controversial. Sure. And only if you're comfortable. It's I think on the mind of many people. Yes. It's the Jews that remained in Iran, who still remain in Iran. First of all, why? And do they support Israel in secret, or have they been brainwashed to believe that Israel is evil?
Since the population of Jews, there's maybe a few thousand right now. And no one in my family or a distant family or any family has any relatives there. Pretty much everyone left either pre-revolution or right after the Iraq-Iran war. I don't know why they stayed. I really don't. Unless they had family and business there, they could not leave. I really still to this day, it's something that's mind-boggling to me, because so many of us had to leave our property, our belongings. A lot of people left with, they may have been pretty wealthy when they were there. When they came here, they had to leave it. I had an aunt who had to go back and forth, my mom's aunt, to try to get, money from the land that they own, and they still couldn't. So I'm not sure why they stayed. And I don't know if they've been brainwashed or if they're just, keeping quiet and, going with the flow. I'm very curious to know myself, but it's odd because the majority of us are either here or in Israel. So I'm not sure why they stayed. And I can't imagine as a female and as any religion, especially now living there. I don't get it.
And I'm not judging them negatively. I'm just more.
I'm not either. I don't know. Yeah.
I think and it's also and I'm not going to link this because it was such a long time ago, but I was reading some kind of article where this Jewish man in Iran was bashing Israel. And so, my parents came from a former Soviet Union country. So I understand all about, you say one thing, you believe another thing, but closed doors. So my first initial reaction was okay, he has to say this. Otherwise, there could be ramifications.
Right.
But then I was afraid, I was like, oh my gosh, but they've lived there for so many decades. And, perhaps he was a child when the
Mhm.
revolution happened. And if you
Right.
hear your whole entire life, Israel is evil, and rabbis in your synagogue are not pushing back because obviously
Right.
the the eyes and ears of the Ayatollahs everywhere could, God forbid, like they actually maybe believe some of that propaganda. Like I don't know. Like I'm
I
very
mean, we see it happening in America though, don't we?
oh yeah.
I mean, if
Oh, yeah.
it's possible, then it's possible.
Right.
Anyone can be brainwashed. Yeah, anyone can. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's so
Absolutely.
yeah, but brainwashing is the most powerful tool, and you can use it
Yeah.
for evil, but it's, especially like when it applies to Jews, it can cause
Yes.
actual harm within our community.
Actual harm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I always say if it's happening in America, it's not that much of a stretch to say that it happened in Iran because, yeah, brainwashing.
And then Iran, just multiply that by 50, and
Exactly.
that's what's happening there.
Exactly.
And
It's a generational thing in Iran. It's the history of Iran and Jews in Iran and the whole conversion when Islam came in. And there's such just a horrible history. And then at some point, because a lot of Jews would not convert, I assume that was part of it. They had to be considered the dirty, all the tropes and everything that I don't want to repeat. And yeah, we had to be looked at as less than. And I don't blame Muslim Iranians, I have to say, because I feel like it's generational brainwashing and propaganda, and how can I be upset at someone when that's all they were told repeatedly? So, but how do you then change that? How do you change that?
And I think it's also, I'm going to inject a little bit of my
Yes.
personal beliefs in this, is that it starts with us. And like you said, I also do not blame Muslims for being anti-Semitic. I mean, obviously terrorists for
Right.
but those
Right.
obviously are minority. Like, I mean, if
Yeah.
all Muslims went and murdered Jews, none of us would be around, because there's
Of course. Right.
billion of them. I also believe that there's a lot of ethnic Jews. I mean, you have 20% of Hispanics that are genetically Jews.
Yes.
Jews, but I guess self-identifying Jews, there's 15, 16 million of us.
Yes.
None of us would be here if all of
Exactly.
actually.
Yes.
But in my own line of work, for those who are listening for the first time, I'm a Zionism educator, and I was anti-Israel for 20 years, which is a long time, after having had my bat mitzvah on top of the Masada at the age
Wow.
of 18, and then within a year. At first, it was the media that came in and reorganized my thought processes. I'm sorry. And then as an adult, it was the Jewish organizations using incorrect anti-Semitic terminology. And I talk about that all the time.
Wow.
So it honestly, like, if we don't know our own history and we don't know the terminology, and then, like you said, like, we interact with Muslims and Christians and anyone and anything, they look to us for guidance on our own facts and history, just like you do. Like, I don't know that much, let's say, about Taiwan. I know Taiwanese people, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak on their history. So I ask them questions like, oh, like, I heard this in the media, is that true? Are you Taiwanese? Is it part of China? Like,
right.
I'm educated. And so if you have someone from Taiwan who toes the anti-Taiwanese party line, let's say, right, then you're going to believe them. And that's like what happens to non-Jews as well. Like, they'll ask Jews, like, so is it the West Bank? Did Israel steal land from Arabs? And all it takes is for one Jew to answer in the affirmative, and there we go, right? And I was guilty of that for 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, sadly, I admit to that. So you just, the power of our
It is the power of persuasion. And they're doing that on campuses now too. And it's, oh my God, is it just unreal?
And it's all driven by Jews. Like, it's driven by, if not now, by
Yes.
J Street. I mean,
don't get me started on J Street. That's wow, next level. Next level.
Just on J Street.
Yeah.
But, so circle back to, I just was thinking about this for a long time. It's because I'm familiar a little bit with the Jews here who mostly live in Great Neck, right? Like that's where the community
Right.
is concentrated. I know little to nothing about the Jews, the Persian Jews who live in LA. So I know that LA is known as Little Tehran to many, but what is the reality in terms of Jewish Muslim
Do
relationship?
you want the good, the bad, and the ugly?
I want everything because okay, I'm gonna admit something really lowbrow. So I did watch the Shahs of Sunset.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
And I saw, well, I just want to, because I'm curious. I'm always curious about
Right.
just different cultures, right? Like if there
Right.
was, I don't know, let's say like the Princes of Wales, like I would watch that
Right.
too.
Oh, right.
You know, and just for different contexts. So I watched because at that time I didn't have Persian
Right.
friends, nothing. And so I saw, at least on the show, I mean, no shows are
Right. Yes, scripted and over.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were like Muslims and they were Jews and they were going to Shabbat and Iftar and of course like there was some controversy, some I don't know these names, but like some woman was a bit anti-Semitic, but she went to Israel, she got a Hebrew tattoo, but she was against the hotel and she was like afraid of the wall. It was like a whole thing. And so my question is, yes, like what's the actual reality?
Okay, so how much of that show is true? You know, it's so sad because I felt like it showed a lot of our Iranian culture. And a part of where the Muslim and Jewish culture intersects is when we party. Like that's where we are all one. There is no difference. No one knows who's Jewish or Muslim. And you saw that on the show.
Right.
There's a lot of getting dressed up and showing up and you know, showing off maybe. And there is a lot of that over the top, you know, when you have even two people, if you have two people over compared to 10 people, you still serve the same thing. It's madness and it makes no sense. And you know, you run around for a week just to serve likes, you know, it's crazy, but it's really how it is. It's really how we party. Some of it, of course, was over the top and for the show. I didn't watch like all the seasons, so I don't know what that controversy was about. And I know it was a while ago. And there were, of course, Jews and Muslims that can be best friends, and that's all happens. And you know,
so you're saying that is reality. So like, let's say, you know, you're in LA, so it's not unusual, would you say, for a let's say a Persian Jew to be friends with a Muslim? Like
one of my best friends is Muslim. Like one of my close, I consider her like a sister. And like I said, it's, you know, I feel it's the character. I don't know anyone personally who says, oh, that person is Jewish, so I'm not going to talk to them. Oh, that person is Muslim. I personally haven't had that experience, thankfully. And I really feel awful if someone has on either side. But no, in LA, it's just, you know, the only difference is Persian Jews are either all related to each other somehow, you know, like, oh, the power came back on. I was, oh my God. We're all related, or there's always a party. So we'll all see each other and we'll all know each other. But in the Muslim community, because like there's a concentration of Iranian Jews in LA, like the West Side, and then Muslim Jews, the concentration is in like, what's it called? Irvine or Agora Hills, you know, or Westlake. What's the other one called? Calabasas. You know what I mean? So we're not
outside. So outside.
There's outside. Yeah, and I don't know how that happened. It just did. I'm not saying like only Jews are here, only Muslims are there, but that's most of the population of Jews are here.
Okay.
But the Muslims are kind of everywhere, but the Jews are in here. Like you don't have as many Jews like Irvine or Agora, so the concentration of Iranian Jews is in LA. But yeah, we go to each other's. We're friends at parties. The kids grow up together. You know, I wouldn't. Yeah, and you know, these protests for Iran that have been happening the past few months, it's Iranian Jews and Muslims walking side by side. Yeah,
and even non-Persians, like I was at a protest here in New York City to support. Okay. We're back.
Okay, we're back. I don't know where we were.
California.
Heat stroke, heat wave. Okay. So what were we saying? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So we're, you know, so you're saying like, you know, just geographically, we're dispersed a little bit differently, but most people do have that, that connection. And so here's an odd question, but not so odd coming from, I guess, like my community. So I don't consider myself part of the Russian Jewish culture. Like my family, my immediate family has always been very integrated. I barely speak Russian, but I know that in the Russian Jewish community, of course, it's encouraged to marry Jews,
Yes.
fellow Jews,
Yeah.
specifically Russian Jews. But I do see, not few Russian Jews marrying Russian Russians, right? And that's not seen as that controversial. And so, what about in the Persian Jewish community? Like, would Persian Jews ever marry Muslims, like, or is that just not something that would happen?
I know a few people, and it's usually the ones I know. It's the wife that converted to Judaism, and they raise their kid Jewish, and that's usually what I've seen. But I'd see some interfaith, what we call interfaith, I guess.
Yeah.
Marriages. Yeah. But no, in our community, they obviously it's preferred that you marry Jewish. Before it was preferred that he was Persian and Jewish. And now the parents are like, just get married. And it doesn't matter. So,
but it's not like Sean, because like I know like
it's not it's not a shock, but I mean, look, obviously, now that I'm an adult, because when I was a kid, I'm like, it doesn't matter. You want someone that shares your values, and especially in a heated moment right now where we are in the world. I mean, I certainly can't imagine not being with someone who shared my beliefs and values, especially now, because why would you want to have those constant battles and disagreements? It's not fair to either person. So,
absolutely,
yeah.
There's enough to battle about.
And there's enough to battle about. Before, I didn't think it was an issue because there wasn't such this huge focus on what's going on, and it's so tribal now. And I do think it's important now, but as a community, obviously it's definitely a thing. Marry within your own. But it's not, I know many people who married outside, and depending on the family, very accepting, very it doesn't matter as long as you're a good person, honestly.
I like that.
I feel like that's all that really matters, honestly. Be a good person.
So you explained something that I'm very confused about. It's okay. So I heard from some people, and I think from the Persian Jewish community, that the Jews who ended up on Long Island, specifically Great Neck, that they're all from the same town in Iran.
Yeah, you can all be from different. Yeah.
Okay.
The reason some stayed in Long Island and some came to LA was either weather or other family that was there first, honestly.
And so
it's in like, yeah.
I'm sorry. And so the Jews in LA, I mean, obviously there's more Jews in LA, right?
Right.
So they came from everywhere else, or was it also like
same
this
place?
town moves here, this town?
No. It's not. No, you have people who are in LA, like Persian Jews that are here from. Oh, we didn't discuss if we want to be called Iranian or Persian.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I on that too.
I really, honestly, for me, I'll get back to that after this.
Okay.
No, we all came from the same places, mostly Tehran, and any other place. We just all wound up coming to America. Why we focus on the two different coasts is I have no idea. For us, my dad had family that had moved to New York, and my mom had family that moved to LA. So it's just a matter of choosing where we would build a life, I suppose. So, but no, it's no particular. No. I've never heard that. That's interesting.
This is so fascinating to me.
Really? I feel like I'm learning more about me through you.
No, this is so fascinating because, you're on episode 8. And so the first episode was more on Zionism education and what's wrong with it on today's college campuses. But every other episode has been about different diaspora communities, especially, the Mizrahi, Sephardic. And it's really interesting how every single diaspora community, how it was constituted so differently, and in terms of immigration. So for example, I was interviewing a Yemeni Jew, and he was saying how in the 1950s, the Jews who ended up in Israel from Yemen came from thousands of small villages, like thousands.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
And so what a difference. And I was just thinking about that. I was like, wow, what a difference. Like you're saying that most Jews lived in and around Tehran, right? Like
most of them were in Tehran. Yes. Most, yes.
So
a large portion. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So in terms of the name, so Is it Persian Jews, Iranian Jews?
So
Break
one
that.
other thing I should tell you, there's one more thing that connects to this is sometimes I'll even meet Iranians, mostly non-Jews, if you're from northern part of Iran, you're more fair. Wait, am I getting this wrong? You're more fair skinned and you're lighter. And if you're from the southern part, you're darker. So there's sometimes I'll meet people from different parts of the, like, it's very rare, but I do. And I'm like, you don't look Persian. They're like, you don't look Persian. And so growing up, I thought Iranian Persians looked a certain way, you know, brown hair, brown eyes, dark skin. I had like one aunt, like my uncle's wife had green eyes. So it depending on how close you were to like the Caspian Sea, the lighter your eyes and the lighter your skin, I guess. So I just thought that was interesting. So being called Iranian or Persian, when we moved here, obviously, I don't think anyone knew what Iran was. They didn't know where it was on the map. And for some reason, Persian became a more acceptable thing to say. And it sounded prettier than Iranian, I suppose. And back then, because again, you want to assimilate, we just said Persian. And people, for some reason, recognize Persian as opposed to Iran, because Persia just spans empire. And like, if I had to point out Iran, they'd be like, what are you talking about? So, and I think it changed over time. And now we feel maybe the past 20, 30 years, now we're over the trauma. And now we want to go back to our roots and saying Iranian, there's a different power to it, you know, and now you're really connecting with your roots. And now I think that's the difference.
So taking that power back to the revolution, what happened. And so speaking of revolution, so where do you see the Jewish community fitting in once the regime finally topples? And it will, we know that, we just don't know when.
Right.
And are Jews in Iran joining in on the protests?
You know, the reporting about what goes on in Iran is very, very interesting because, you know, you have to be on WhatsApp or on Telegraph, and you get so many different versions of the story about what's going on in different parts of Iran too. So where are the protests? And like some places are like, oh, there's no protests here, and other parts are like, there are protests here. So I'm not sure what's happening there. And I don't know if there are Jews participating in it. As you know, they do jail and torture many people who protest. Again, the stories are so hidden from us due to the limits that regime has put on information getting out. I really don't know, honestly. And I don't know if it matters even if the Jews are protesting. I mean, I'm hoping they are. I hope everyone protests, but I also understand you want to preserve your family and your life. And
there's so few Jews there as it is.
There's so few Jews. Yeah. So
yeah. And so you see, so let's say, you know, like, I mean, hopefully sooner than later, but let's say 2-3 years from now, the regime is no longer intact and you have a more moderate government there. Where do you see the Jewish community fitting in? Do you see it growing in size? Do you see any, let's say, Iranian Jews coming back to Iran to help?
No. I don't see any Iranian going back to Iran, honestly, that after having lived here for, 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years. I honestly don't see it. First of all, it won't happen in 2, 3, 4 years. I really don't think it'll happen in our lifetime for it to be moderate enough.
Wow.
For anyone to, I don't think so. Will a change happen? A start of a change? Possibly. But the stronghold that regime has, or other people behind it, it's too strong. And
so you're saying, so that this is like a completely obviously off the cuff question here, and I'm hoping I'm not putting too much in.
I'm hoping my battery doesn't die because of that power outage. I don't know what happened. I'm just warning you.
My battery here is a little bit.
I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
But I think this is, but I think we should wrap this up on a very important question, even though this is more to do with current politics.
Yes.
It's that the protests we're seeing now, right? Like, we know we're seeing countrywide protests or nationwide protests. Are those protests indicative of the majority of Iranians, or is that the very minority that's feeling anti the regime?
You know, it's, I know people that even though they've lived here for 40 years that are not Jewish, that still say, the Shah was awful. And I always like, well, why did you move here then? It's so funny. It's like this cognitive dissonance of like, you left, but I don't understand it. There's no logic within it. So as the kind of makes me wonder, I do feel most Iranians here do want Iran to be free. Absolutely. In the protests, we do want it to be free. Who wants to see any young person being hung or tortured or killed? Or it's just, who wants to see that? Especially with a nation that was so progressive. And by progressive, I don't mean today's standards. I mean like progressive in technology, fashion, language, industry. It's so sad. And especially because I feel like the children who live there now, or people our age, are a product of a generation who got brainwashed into thinking the Shah was bad. Yeah. And now their children and grandchildren are paying the price. That's really how I feel. And how do you unring that bell? Mm-hmm. How do you unring that bell? It's so difficult to do that now. And I know there are people who are trying to do things maybe behind the scenes, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm very passionate about Iran being free. I mean, why wouldn't you want there to be human rights for people? Especially.
And I think we should leave this off, a little bit Israel related.
Yes.
I'm always curious, and this could be, again, a controversial question, but that's okay because this podcast is definitely not PC in any. How involved, without obviously knowing details, how involved do you surmise is Israel behind the scenes in what's going on with Iran and the Iranian protests and helping them out?
I think Israel knows what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, they might not admit to knowing what's going on, but I feel like Israel as a nation has always been a step or two ahead. They're not fools, knowing that Iran is there with these nuclear weapons, they're ready, So if your question is, are they prepared to defend? Absolutely. Are they helping with toppling the nuclear plans? Probably.
Or even the regime, like, are they helping the protesters in?
It's very likely. It's possible. But look at the language I have to use now. It's like, even I can't really say I'm no one, I'm not connected to anything or to anyone, but there's still this like, oh my God, I can't speak out against this person or that country. It's a sad state of affairs where this is where we are. But I do feel Israel knows, because it has to protect itself and that region. People think, oh, you just want to protect your own little nation. No, you have to, everyone in the surrounding areas also has to be stable. That's the word I was looking for. Destabilization. Yeah. So I think that's why I think our relationship with Israel, America's relationship with Israel, should always be so strong, because that is that one little area of hope in that region to keep it stable. And now with the Abraham Accords, which is like unreal to me, that Saudi Arabia and like these other nations are less anti-Semitic than people in America. So,
you want to hear something crazy that I just read yesterday? Maybe breaking news. So Israel named its first military attaché to Morocco.
Wow.
When did we ever think as Jews that Morocco would be holding military exercises together?
It's happening. And I hosted actually the delegates from the Abraham Accords, the Sharaka delegates. So that was amazing. And to hear them speak gave me so much hope. And you know what? You might have to have one of them on your show too. I think it'll be really, definitely making that introduction.
We're actually gonna have like a whole conversation off the record about this at some other time, because I'm very pro, I think this is what sets Taking Back the Narrative apart from others, is that from other Zionist initiatives, I'm very pro-Arab, obviously pro-Muslim Arabs, not pro-Muslim Zionists, pro-Arab Zionists.
Yes.
We're not talking about the ones who passionately.
Obviously, yes.
And what I found is that, like my own company, 35% of subscribers are now Arab, and we increased from 25% just maybe half a year ago. And what I'm noticing is it's the Arabs who are so ready for knowledge, and they
Yeah.
ask for materials, and I want to share with my family and my friends, and I want to start, my own Zionist group in my country, my town. And it's
Mhm.
easier for me to communicate facts and the correct narrative about Israel to Arabs who obviously are there to absorb information, sadly, than it is to some Jews
I
who
know. I know.
and I want that to change, right? It's like we're all capable of change. And
Yeah.
so if we don't have these honest conversations, and even this podcast, right? It's like, like one of the reasons, the main reason I'm having this podcast this season, so to say, it's because in America, it's very Ashkenaz centric.
Mhm.
Most of the Jews here are Ashkenaz,
Yes.
and non-Jews know only the Jewish culture from an Ashkenaz perspective, right? Like the
Yes.
Makkals and the 1950s
Yes.
romanticization, and
Yes.
the deli scene in New York City.
Yes.
And it's not true, right? Like I remember during the riots in 2020, the summer of love, as some
Yeah.
people call it, there were images, that there were videos of Bukharian Jews in Miami with rifles ready to defend their jewelry shop. And there were comments like from Jews, "What's a Bukharian?" I'm like, wait, how do you not know? And so
Right.
that's to really amplify the voices of a lot of Mizrahi and Sephardic communities that, like maybe people have heard of, but not heard personal stories, or have not heard of at all. So I
Right.
want to say thank you so much to you, Sharon, for sharing your story, for sharing your wise insight into the overall Iranian, I keep saying Persian, Iranian.
It's okay. You know what? And so
Even
we don't know.
and the relations, and like even your very intuitive insight into what's happening now in Iran, what could be happening in the future, the Israel connection. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
I can now think of a future podcast I would love to have you on it.
I've already thought of stuff in my head too. I'm taking notes.
Like we easily could talk for another 2 hours.
We definitely, if it wasn't for the heat and the power outage.
And it being 9 p.m. here. And
yes, definitely.
So we'll have to continue a lot, but I think this is great. This was a great, more than an introduction. I think this was introduction and intermediate conversation. So I again, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.